Good evening. Let me test to make sure everyone can hear me out there in the back. Can you hear me okay, Doug? Okay, good. I'm John Stride. I'm the president of City Club of Portland. We're delighted to welcome you here this evening to our City Club Forum. And it's my honor to introduce Multnomah County District Attorney Nathan Vasquez and COIN's Political Director Ken Boddy. Our two guests will discuss the job of the county's top elected prosecutor in times of urgent and controversial enforcement challenges. But before we begin, take a moment to silence your cell phones, please. Now just a quick word about City Club. City Club's mission is to inform the public and our members about public matters, leading them to appreciate the responsibilities of citizenship. We accomplish this through producing nonpartisan public forums, debates, and research that informs them about elections and policy matters. City Club is committed to providing a space for civic dialogue that encourages respectful discussion and positive change. It is the City Club members who provide our ideas, lead our conversations, conduct our research, and plan programs like this one that are important to our community. A couple upcoming events. On Friday at noon, December 5th, we present State Treasurer Elizabeth Steiner in a conversation with former State Treasurer Randall Edwards. And on Friday noon, December 12th, we present a final program in our four-part series on the future of downtown Portland, moderated by former Congressman Earl Blumenauer, with panelists Aaron Graham from OMSI, Nolan Leinhart from ZGF Architects, and Diagnan Kallman, Vice President of Philanthropy and Partnership at the 1803 Fund. City Club welcomes all individuals who care about our region and our city to become members. You can learn more about events, membership, and research at our site, pdxcityclub.org. You can also use the QR code at the front desk to join or contribute to City Club. We appreciate your support for our important work. For developing today's program, we offer special thanks to Kayla Kennett, City Club's Communication Director, and to Sam Metz and Regina Baker for attending to all the details that are necessary to put on a program like this one. Finally, let's take a moment to thank our season sponsors that pay for this event, for our videographers, and allow us to offer these programs for free to the public. Those are AARP Oregon, Chevron, Fight Against Sex Trafficking, and the Don Sterling Fund at the Oregon Community Foundation. We thank them for their generous support, and please recognize them. Now to today's program. Nathan Vasquez began his legal career as an intern in the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office. Now, after nearly 25 years as a county prosecutor, he is the top prosecutor in that office itself. As DA, he is responsible for prosecuting all violations of state law committed in Multnomah County. His office handles thousands of cases, from felonies, misdemeanors, violent crimes, property crimes, and even violations of Portland's municipal law. That's unique, Mr. Vasquez. He was elected in the November 2024 election, in which he defeated an incumbent county district attorney over issues ranging from drug decriminalization, the devastating demonstrations following the murder of George Floyd that occurred in Minneapolis, and an economic downturn in Portland caused by the COVID shutdowns. In his first term, he has battled proposed county budget cuts, inadequate access to public defenders, and federal agents untrained in police work, but charged with protecting the federal buildings. Our moderator today is Ken Boddy, Political Director of COIN 6. Ken started at COIN in 1985, working since then as producer, business reporter, legislative reporter, and lastly as anchor for COIN 6 News This Morning. He won his first regional Emmy for his response to a racist letter and a second Emmy for his role in anchoring Eye on Northwest Politics. We're looking forward to a lively exchange. After the discussion, we will take questions from the audience. While many of you, when you registered, were able to list some questions that you'd like us to ask tonight, asking questions at the live microphone is a privilege of membership. So if you're a member, you may step up to the microphone and ask a question. I'm asking you right now to all be thinking of a question during the course of this discussion that you would like to ask the district attorney. And now, Mr. Vasquez, Mr. Body, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sam. I appreciate you all being here. I've interviewed Mr. Vasquez a number of times on my program, so it's good to interview him in this setting in front of all of you. I'll say right off the bat, there will be no questions about the Epstein files, so we'll make sure that we don't get there. Let's talk about the issue that's been on the minds of many people in Multnomah County over the past couple of months, ICE. U.S. Border Patrol has just reported 560 ICE arrests in Portland this past month. That's a major uptick from previous months. We've also seen ICE and Portland police arresting demonstrators at the ICE facility in South Waterfront. Just kind of delineate who's arresting who, what are they getting charged with, and what courts do they end up in?
Well, first I'm going to start off by saying thank you to everyone for being here. I just really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. I feel so lucky to have such an experienced moderator to help me through these really are really challenging topics, and so important that we have this conversation. So let's jump in. When we talk about who's prosecuting who and what's going on, is that in this particular instance we have a pretty I don't know if we want to call it stationary, but we have a set protest that is occurring down at the South Waterfront in front of this, federal facility. So the way that that it gets divided up is that when we have crimes that are, occurring either against a federal agent or against this federal property, the U.S. Attorney's Office in this particular instance has been very clear that they are going to handle those. That's, that has been communicated to me, and it's been what we're seeing occurring. So in other words, if when we started out, my office started taking some of these cases. There was some, there were individuals that set fire to the gate, for example. We took those cases on. But the U.S. Attorney's Office has kind of stepped up and said, no, we want to take those on. We want to deal with that. So they have kind of stepped into that space, if you will. And so an easy example is if someone threw a brick and it broke out a window there, the federal officers, you'll see, they're gonna come out, they're gonna take someone into custody, and they're gonna be processed through the federal system in the federal courthouse. Now, what happens when you have something like this that gains lots of national attention, and I'm in a situation where, thankfully this isn't my first rodeo. I've been doing this for, like we heard, about 25 years. I handled protests beginning really early on in my career, on into the 2016 Trump election. We had a lot going on then, into 2018, into 2020. And so I've seen kind of all the different iterations that we've had so far. And this is, it's a slight variation on what we've seen in the past. It's a lot more mellow, despite what the national news, Fox News, says. This is something that is, there's a situation now, though, it's gotten a lot of attention, and you have people on the far right, and you have people on the far left, and they are coming together out in front of the ICE facility, having a lot of, we'll call it political discourse. And sometimes that discourse turns into, some physical altercations. And that is happening on the streets of Portland. That is that is really a Multnomah County or state of Oregon problem, and that's my responsibility. So when you see an assault occur, when they, when two individuals start fighting and wrestling around, there are various crimes that can occur there. And so that's where my office is stepping in and saying, hey, we just want to keep the peace. And I've said very clearly from day one when I took office is, I don't care whether an individual's on the left, the right, the center, it doesn't matter. I'm going to treat it all the same, and if an individual breaks the law, they're going to be held accountable. So that's where I'm trying to step into this space when we talk about what's happening out in front of that facility, down South Waterfront. with all that, there's a lot more layers to it. So I don't ever try to make it simple. I understand the complexity. There's a lot of, we'll probably get into it a little more, but my office spends a lot of time trying to work with with the various populations within the community, because I'll say all this is happening, it really hurts our community. It hurts my office, when we talk about victims and witnesses and are they willing to come to court. Because if we step back for a moment and think of an individual that is maybe not from this country, and they look at it and they say it's the government. And so I've been spending a lot of time trying to go out in the community and say there's differences, right? I'm here to serve this population here locally. If you're a victim of a crime, I'm here to serve you. And so that's a hard distinction for people, though. I mean, when they see the federal government taking such, draconian type actions, it's a hard distinction. So I'm trying to be very thoughtful and intentional in how I approach our community and the needs of our community.
You talk about the complexity of these issues. Is there a clear delineation between the jurisdictions of Portland Police and what the feds are doing?
It's, I would say it's less than clear, but certainly Portland Police have been trying hard to kind of maintain this position, which is, they're trying to do much like what I'm saying is they're staying out on the streets. They're not going into the ICE facility. The delineation they've been very clear about is they are not going to assist ICE in any immigration or enforcement actions, or really anything that comes close to that. So it's been a point of contention, because there's issues of egress and ingress into the building. And so that's one of the points of contention. But to be clear, they are trying to maintain the peace on the streets out front. That's what they're trying to do. And I think we've seen actually, it's a tactic that was used in the past and that was very effective, is the dialogue officers. Portland, I know there's a lot of controversy around it, but how Portland police handle mass demonstrations, they are really one of the leading agencies in the nation because they've studied it so much and they've had so much practice, as we all know. And so they're trying to get the dialogue officers out there to really really kind of de-escalate conflicts and trying to keep the peace out on the streets. So right now it's, again, very much Portland police engaged out on the streets in and around, and then the federal officers are hopefully staying inside the federal facility as much as possible.
Do any immigration cases actually come through your office? And if they do, are you prosecuting more of them these days?
So the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office is subject to the state laws of Oregon. And so as you may or may not know, but Oregon has some very kind of very direct laws about being a sanctuary state. Multnomah County, City of Oregon being sanctuary. So we don't deal with any immigration issues in my office, in the sense that we're not prosecuting or involved in any type of immigration enforcement actions. In fact, we're really prohibited by state law from being involved. And I'll give you a very clear example of this. If an individual comes into custody on a state charge, like we'll say on a violent assault, we are currently prohibited from calling federal immigration if they happen to be a person that's undocumented. Now, I'll take it one step back further and say we're not even asking that question. That's not something that my office engages in. It's not something that Portland Police engages in. So whether a person is undocumented or not, that's not something that we really work in or engage in or deal with. So my focus is always going to be on this community and the laws of the state of Oregon, and how do I help protect this community.
A.G. Rayfield, Attorney General Rayfield, and Washington County DA Kevin Barton just announced a new crime-fighting effort called SPIRE. That's Special Projects Investigate, Respond, and Enforce. Is that something that the Multnomah County DA's office would be involved with, possibly with Attorney General Dan Rayfield?
Yeah, we've been very fortunate in that Attorney General Dan Rayfield, myself, DA Kevin Barton, and DA John Wentworth, and to an extent some of the other DAs around the state, but particularly the four of us, we've had a very collaborative relationship, and we've had lots of discussions about different joint initiatives. The SPIRE one is one that certainly the Attorney General and I discussed We had just breakfast, I think it was just 2 weekends ago, and I have some upcoming initiatives that we'll be announcing in the coming days, of which really that will impact the metro area. They'll be very collaborative, and that the Attorney General and I have discussed on his partnership with as well.
Oh, so we can't break any news here tonight?
Check in tomorrow.
Okay, I will. You know I will. Well, let's get back to the city of Portland proper. Mayor Wilson has reinstated the homeless camping ban. However, the city council has voted down money to expand homeless sweeps. So how does the DA's office handle any increase in homeless arrests by the city, and do you anticipate that happening?
Yeah. So let's go through kind of what the context and what's happened. So obviously we have the mayor who was elected on a very kind of, I'm going to say, singular platform. I mean, it's not that he doesn't care about other city issues, but I think all of us that saw that election, he was very focused on this issue around those individuals that are houseless and how do we get people off the streets. He has been, I think, if you hear him in just about every single talk he gives, he's going to talk about that. And for the past year, he's been trying to build shelter capacity. And this really, when we put it in the full context, is it's related back to some of those cases that we heard about camping and can you enforce camping laws. That was, I believe, there's a case about Grants Pass, and you can't arrest people or deal with that unless you're providing shelter. So he built up shelter capacity, and then, quite frankly, he came to me and said, hey, I want to start really enforcing our camping laws to connect people with shelter. And I said, let's talk about that. Let's understand. I wanted to have a very clear understanding before we got involved. I said, is this going to be an effort simply to sweep camps and arrest people, or is it going to be designed to connect people with shelter, to give them services, and to actually impact this underlying issue? And so we talked about that, and certainly he is very dedicated to that. So what's happening now is that the city of Portland has a very kind of detailed method in which they go and they score each camp. And as much as I think, because what I heard is people ask, well, why isn't someone coming and clean up the camp in front of my house? And it's like, well, how does it score? And so the city of Portland scores these camps, and it looks at the ones that are, quite frankly, the most out of control, right? These are the ones that have garbage and blocking sidewalks near schools, the ones that are, having the largest impact. They go to those camps, they're bringing outreach workers, police officers, and saying, hey, this camp has to move, has to be cleaned up, and we're going to give you services. Here are the shelters that are available. So that was part of what we discussed in that agreement. What we're seeing happening is that, they've contacted quite a few camps, and most all of those, in fact, really almost 90%, they're not making arrest in what we think about around camping. They're actually, when they contact people, they're finding those folks have warrants, and they're picking them up on unrelated warrants for their arrest. So in other words, they failed to appear on cases like, failure to register as a sex offender, theft cases. They've had some weapons cases, things like that. So that's what we're seeing right now. Of the remaining amount, they've had a few arrests that were on things like unlawful possession of certain weapons. And I think they've cited, it's really got to be under 5% of people that they've actually cited for a camping violation. So what's happening is they're giving warnings, they're connecting people to services, they're trying to get people into shelter. Those ones that are going to come to my office, they get what's called a citation. So they're not being arrested, they're not being brought to jail right now. A citation, think of it like a traffic ticket, but it says you have to appear in court. And so I'm going to tell you right now, my office is going to issue those cases, but we're going to do everything we can to work with the individual and say, if you get into shelter, we're going to dismiss that case. If you are, if there are ways we can help connect you to shelter, we're going to do that. Because what I want to see the end result is, I want to see people off the streets into the shelter that this community has really dedicated immense resources to this issue, immense. And I think there's a little bit of fatigue in our community. We want to know, are all of our efforts leading to something? Are we getting something out of that? And I don't pretend to say, hey, there's one way to do this, you can rest your way out, or that there's just a simple answer. There's not. But we got to be doing better than what we have so far. And that means, what we need to look at what I like to call the push-pull. So yes, we're going to give them a little bit of a push, but we're going to put a hand out and say we're going to help to pull you into a better situation. And so that's what we're working on, is how do we find all those different ways. In my office, we're talking about, can we get people from some of the different organizations such as City Team and others to come into the court, to meet people where they're at, to help get them, again, off the street, into shelter, into hopefully a more stable and better situation.
Do you have enough options in that regard? Do you have places where you can sentence people to or place people, including deflection? We've talked about deflection in the past as well. How's that working?
Well, now we're getting to a whole new topic. So, let's start. I'm going to stay with the camping for a minute, and then we're going to transition into deflection. So when it comes to the issue about people living out on the streets, I do believe right now we have enough shelter options. The mayor said that he had 900 beds available. So if there's 900 beds available, as long as there's that many beds available, we need to be connecting people to those options. Again, it's not going to be a one simple option. When I've spent a lot of time out with our neighborhood officers, and I spent a lot of time, whether it's out on 122nd or in Old Town or in different parts. When you meet folks out on the streets, they're there for a variety of reasons, and they have a variety of challenges, and they have a variety of life circumstances. But right now, with our shelters, they're offering a whole host of low barrier type shelters that accept them with animals, they're for women's shelters. So there are different options available right now. So those are there. We just need to get people connected and make sure that we are doing everything we can to get them there. Now, deflection.
Yes.
Do you have particular questions, or you want me just to give you my overall thoughts?
Well, we've had deflection for a while now. We've had that facility over in Southeast Portland for a while now. Is it working? And is that an option that you think is a good option for people who are in that situation?
I tend to be a very direct person. So I'm going to tell you, no, it's not working currently. So the simple answer is no, but let's back up and get some context. When we went on this big experiment, Measure 110, and we decriminalized drugs, I'll still say that did not work. We saw massive skyrocketing overdose deaths. For someone that, I live in Portland, and I work downtown, every day. So, and I'm someone that I like to get out of the office. I like to, whether it's running the waterfront, riding around with officers on bicycles, going out to 122nd, I love to be out in the city and see our community in all the different neighborhoods. And I did that in 2020, 2021, 2022, even through the COVID years. And I can tell you, during that time, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, remember, there were times where you would walk around and it felt like the city was abandoned except for people that were high on fentanyl. And that was hard to watch. I can tell you that in 2022, I remember distinctly going around, stopping my vehicle multiple times to approach someone and shake them to say, are you alive? Are you okay? Do you need an ambulance? We're getting better. We're not great, but we're getting better. I think for those of us that saw how it was in 2022 versus how it is now, we're in a much better place. But I'm not satisfied. I'll tell you that the overdose deaths are still high. And I always look at that and I think about that as someone who overdoses and dies, that's a human being. That's someone's child, that's someone's, partner, that is someone's, sister, brother, mother, father. These people matter. And we need to be fighting every day to help these individuals. And the deflection idea is when we decided, okay, we're going to move away from Measure 110, and now we're going to go to recriminalization, except we're going to put this whole series of what we call deflection. It used to be diversion. Now we call it deflection. But what we've done is we've put, some people like to call them off-ramps or whatever, however you want to call it, but a lot of different ways in which we're going to allow people to get connected with treatment before we, use jail or other options. So in fact, there are 2 to 3 different off-ramps. So first you have deflection, and second you have conditional discharge. Then potentially you could be, held in what I'm going to call a conviction for, possession of a controlled substance. So we're talking, even then there's some off-ramps there. Because at the end of that, We're going to expunge your case. We're going to do a lot. So there's 3 off-ramps right there. But we're talking about the first one, and I don't think it's working. We've spent a year on this, and I'll tell you, when I came in, this was actually before office, how this all came about is that Attorney Dan Rayfield, Attorney General, he very kindly wrote a nice letter to the editor of the Oregonian, which got published, that said, why isn't the newly elected DA involved in deflection? This was, about June. I had been elected in May of last year. And so next thing I knew, I got a call, and guess what? You're invited to come help with deflection. The problem is that deflection the train had already left the station. Like, they had started planning this thing, and the chair has a kind of a group that meets, and they talk about it. So they said, you know what we're going to do for deflection? We're not going to do it like any other county. We're going to invest in brick and mortar. We're going to create a deflection center where people can be dropped off. And I said, well, it's an approach. I'm certainly willing to try it and see how it works. There were certain things that when I got there that I was told that was the plan that I've been very clear about. I was told that everyone that was dropped off there would be considered immediately successful, and there were no limits on how many times they could go. And I said, that makes 0 sense. I said, I will not support that, and absolutely not. So they built a very complex system now where you can have 1 deflection per month, and success, when you, I think there's a report coming out soon if it hasn't come out yet. The way that the county walks it through is they say, first, because I'll tell you that here's the basic numbers. 1/3 of the people that are dropped off immediately walk away. They face 0 consequences right now. They walk away. So 1/3. So we start there. 1/3 lost. The remaining 2/3, they walk in and they get an assessment. They call that engaged, people that engage. Now, of the people that engage, so remember, we've already lost 1/3, but now we're down to that 2/3. Of that 2/3, about 18% are considered successful. But again, it's always in well, what is your definition of success? The definition of success is you got an assessment, and then you maybe called a shelter, you maybe attended 1 meeting. Maybe it's as little as you accessed a food pantry. So it's a very low bar, very low bar. My definition of success is, did you meaningfully engage in treatment? So of their current definition of success, where are we at? 18% of the 2/3. So it's a lot less than the total. So we're spending approximately $6 million. We're slated to open a $25 million facility. And at best, I think you could pick out a few anecdotal people that maybe were engaged in meaningful treatment, at best. I don't think that's a good investment of the money. So I'm in the process of kind of rolling out and saying, this has to change, it's going to change, or the district attorney's office is not going to be participating in deflection anymore. We're going to be participating in kind of standard prosecution. I do think there is room for improvement. I do think it can evolve. I don't necessarily know if that means it's going to succeed. Remember, we have set up a complex system of off-ramps and there's a lot of things happening. What I have seen is we've started to move the ball forward once we got away from decriminalization. But I am someone who looks at and demands and says, we need better, we need more. And just to be clear, my intent and desire is never, I want to see people arrested and go to jail. That's not it. My intent and desire is, if we're as a community investing all these resources, all this effort, are we actually connecting people to treatment? Are we holding them accountable and doing it in a compassionate manner? Those will always be the guiding words you're going to hear out of me, are compassionate accountability. But I think without accountability, we're left with people dying on the streets, and I don't think that's acceptable.
You made reducing gun violence and homicides a campaign focus. It's almost a year. You're coming up on a year now that you've been in office. It seems like we've seen an uptick in reported shootings lately. What are your efforts in that arena, and have you had any success in reaching that goal?
Yeah. No, another key area that I talked a lot about and I spent a lot of time on, and I'll say that from the beginning, as a prosecutor who spent so much time with families that have lost a loved one to gun violence, this has been something that is just, it's deeply important to me. And I'll always be the first to say, one death from gun violence is too many. It is. Throughout my career, I saw there were about 20 to 30 homicides in Portland a year. That was kind of, for 2 decades, it was like that. In 2020, it started skyrocketing. In about 2022, we hit the high mark. In 2022, 2023, to about 100 plus a year. And it was devastating for the families to be out there. The office, it was this huge, strain on my office because, my deputy DAs are out there, responding. At that time, it was me out responding to these cases. And, it is hard to even put in words how difficult and tragic it is to go, walk this horrible journey with a family that has suffered such a terrible, terrible loss. And so to answer your question about how is it now? Well, we started to see a little bit of a decline last year. And I'll say that it's interesting that when you look at Portland compared to other major cities around the West Coast and around the United States, the other cities dropped off the table. They saw a spike like Portland, but then they saw a very huge drop. I mean, some cities were down to like 6 homicides a year, in the teens. Cities like Seattle, like San Diego, like these, like cities that it was always shocking that Portland lagged so far behind. Right now, I was just talking to my team because it's something we talk about, just on a regular, continual basis. We're at about 46, somewhere in that range. It's like 43 to 46. There's always a little different in how certain groups count certain numbers. But that's where we're at. So last year we were at 75. So we're seeing it come down. Recently there's been a spate of violence, and it's very concerning. So, from the very beginning, I have set out, and here are the things I've done. I'm certainly seeking legislation that's a kind of some long-term fixes, but in the short term, we have deputies dedicated that go out with our officers. They're working on these cases. We've also leaned heavy into what's called ceasefire. And ceasefire model, thankfully, we saw expanded out of not just Portland, but it's also in Gresham now. This is a community effort in which they are working with individuals that are high risk for gun violence, but they're working to try to prevent that gun violence, to say, how can we interrupt? Is it a young individual that is, that is maybe got shot at, for example? They'll pair them up with mentors. They're trying to find safe ways to get them out of that cycle of violence. So my office has leaned heavy into that. We're working with them closely. I just made some changes in my juvenile department. I put out a longtime prosecutor named Eric Zimmerman, who is really a champion of young individuals, who works hard he's created entire rugby leagues just to help kind of disadvantaged youth to find safe outlets. And he's someone that's piloted and done things back in the times when we were in a much healthier state. He created whole mentorship programs. And so I've given him the very specific charge of, I need you to go out to juvenile. I need you to really work to find the changes and to do the things we can to really every day work to improve this issue. It's something that, as an office, there are about 15 other small little ways we're working on this on a day in, day out basis, but it is about being out in the community. It is about working with community organizations, working with law enforcement, rebuilding partnerships, and creating a situation in which we're serving this community, because one homicide is too many, but 50 hurts. I'll tell you that. It's something that it is painful to see, and I want to see change.
This is something internal that's going on in your office now. DA's office dealing with more than one lawsuit alleging sexism by management under your leadership. What happened there, and what's the status of those lawsuits?
Well, it's a very fair question. Whenever there's change, there's going to be some issues that arise. One person, they filed a tort claim. It was an actual lawsuit. We'd actually made a very generous severance offer because, you know, when you come in, you reorganize, and that position was eliminated. I'll be very frank. From my perspective, that claim had zero merit, zero. The individual recently settled, and they essentially took our severance offer plus $2,000. So any of you out there that have ever dealt with legal issues, there's what's called nuisance value settlements. $2,000 I don't even think equates to that. We tried to be generous and fair with that individual from the very beginning, and that individual, you know, they found another job within the county, so it's not like they're, you know, not completely out of a job. So it's something that, you know, I've dealt with, and I'm very satisfied with the direction we're going and how we resolve that matter.
Did that situation cause you to make any changes within the office, within the DA's office?
I would say no, not directly. I mean, it was the changes in the DA's office that really led this about, right? When you reorganize and restructure things, and there was a lot. When I came in, you know, I changed the entire misdemeanor department. We changed how we process felony cases. I made administrative changes in positions within my office. So there was a massive amount of changes, and sometimes that's going to come with change. You know, there are things that I would say that don't get talked about. The changes like, you know, we put in a whole veterans preference point system so that when we're looking at hiring and promotions, quite frankly, this should have been done, you know, 4 administrations ago, and it wasn't. And so it was something that was missing, and we put into place. You know, so we've been really addressing, you know, kind of a lot of different areas, but I'm very satisfied with the changes we've made.
We've talked a lot in the past, you and I, about the public defender crisis and the fact that we don't have enough public defenders out there. How does it affect what you do in the DA's office, and are we getting more public defenders online?
Well, Ken, you know, I've got a lot of strong feelings about this one. So, and I'll tell you, I take a different approach than really most everyone that talks about this issue. And I've encouraged lots of folks out there to really take a hard look at this, because I do not believe this is a shortage in the way that we think about. And I'll tell you why. One is, from a very basic standpoint, prior to this crisis occurring, you know, the crisis actually coincides with when the defense attorneys in the state of Oregon changed their contract, and all of a sudden we were in a crisis. So before the contract change, we had actually more criminal cases coming in. We had around 12,000 plus cases, and we had no crisis. And we had, I'm going to just tell you this fact, a lot less defense attorneys. Now, they changed the contract. We've continued to have a buildup in attorneys, and I'm going to get back to that point. But we've also had a lot less criminal cases. We're down around 8,000 criminal cases. So 4,000 less cases, more attorneys, and still a crisis. In fact, you know, what happened this past year is, in the past couple of years, here's the things that have happened to be like, because around the state, people are looking at this saying, you know, this is unacceptable. Certainly I'm one of them, because I want every individual out there that needs an attorney that can't afford one to have one, or I can't do my job. So the state legislature, first of all, said, well, you know what's going to fix this? Money. Here's a couple $100 million. That's going to fix it, right? Nope. We saw zero change. In fact, it got worse. So the governor stepped in and said, you know what's going to help? I'm going to change the director, and I, myself and DA Barton paired up, and we went down to the legislature, and we demanded change, and we put forth some legislation and different things, of which the legislature adopted some through what we call budget notes. And so it was great in the sense that it improved for around the state. You know where it didn't improve? Washington County and Multnomah County. We're still in this really terrible phase, and I really want, I'm going to get back to that number, but there's one more thing I want to tell you. Why this matters. It is so important, because what's happening is we're doing a disservice to victims, to the community, and to the individual defendants. How is that? Well, of course, victims don't get their case prosecuted, the community doesn't get justice, but the individual defendants, this is what we're seeing. They're in crisis oftentimes. Look, 80–90% of what I'm dealing with in my office is people that are in crisis of some sort. We're not able to deal with their case, so when their case comes in, I charge it. They go before the court, and the court says, well, I'm sorry, there's no attorney for your stolen motor vehicle case, so we're going to release you and come back in 3 months and we'll see if there's an attorney. They're back out on the streets. Well, in those 3 months, they're still in crisis. We haven't done anything to address it. Now, all of a sudden, they're picking up 2, 3, 4, 5 of those stolen motor vehicle cases. So now, all of a sudden, they get an attorney once they pile up a bunch of cases. And instead of saying, hey, with your one stolen motor vehicle case, we could have worked and talked about treatment and treatment court options and all this. Now they've got 5 or 6, and now it's time to talk about prison because they're out of control. And that's a terrible outcome. It's a terrible outcome for the community. It's a terrible outcome for the individual. And so it's one where it is truly, that's what I'm going to call an everyday sad example. There are much more tragic ones where we've seen individuals not get an attorney and then go on to commit a murder or other violent felony. So it is having terrible effects. But let's get back to the number, because this is the misconception, and I wish people would really take a moment and think about this. So there are 95 prosecutors in my office. We carry large caseloads. My attorneys are coming in weekends. They're working hard. We are handling every case that's coming in. We're reviewing, determining should there be criminal charges, should there not. We're issuing cases. We're going forward. 95. There's 95 of us. So if there's a defense attorney shortage, well, this is a question I ask, well, how many public defenders are there funded by the state of Oregon in Multnomah County? Well, if there's a shortage, there's got to be less than 95. There's 137. 137. And if you take for a moment and remember, not all of my cases require a public defender. There's lots of private bar attorneys out there too, taking cases. So there's 137 public defenders plus private bar to 95 prosecutors, and we're getting the job done. I think we should all demand more and expect more, not from the individual defense attorney. I'll tell you, the individual public defender I see working in court, they're doing a great job. They're out there representing, fighting hard for their clients. It is in the management from the state of Oregon down to our local nonprofit public defense firms that this is the issue. And I'm going to say one last thing, and then we'll get to the next question, is this, that crisis in Washington County, crisis in Multnomah County, well, we got one other major county in the area, that's Clackamas County. Is there a crisis there? Answer is no. So in Multnomah County, we have about between 1,500 to 2,000 cases where there are not attorneys. In Clackamas County, they have close to 0. The difference is they have all consortium attorneys. Their defense bar comes together and manages all those cases. In Multnomah County, we have consortium attorneys who I work with, and they do a great job. And we have 2 what we call nonprofit public defense firms. Those are the ones that are consistently not taking what they call their MAC, maximum allowable case credit. So there still needs to be changes. This is a topic that's important to our community. It's huge. You're going to continue to hear me be very vocal about this because I think we should all be demanding more.
Off the top of your head, do you know how many of these cases haven't been prosecuted because of lack of a defense attorney?
Through the years, at least, well, somewhere in the 2,000 to 3,000 range, somewhere in that range. So that's misdemeanors, a lot of Class C felonies, and a few others that just kind of pop above. One thing we're always fighting and working on is when someone's charged with a major felony or a homicide case, we're doing everything we can to pull from around the state to find an attorney to take those ones as well.
The county filed a lawsuit against multiple fossil fuel companies regarding their role in global warming. Does the DA have a role in that?
I'll always say that these are really important issues. They are huge to our community, global community, our local community and everything. But when it comes to what my job is, I'm looking at person crimes. I'm looking at things that are affecting on the very local community level. And if I lose my focus on that, I'm not going to be serving you. So it's not one that I'm spending on those larger ones. That's where our Attorney General comes in. That's where the partnerships comes with. I certainly routinely review requests from the Attorney General and saying, hey, can we deal with this person over here or this company over there? And I say, absolutely. And we will focus on kind of more the violent crime and other crimes. Occasionally we'll pick up a case here or there.
Last question before we get to questions from the audience. Multnomah County approved a budget reducing the DA's budget by about $200,000. There was talk before those budget decisions that it was going to be reduced by $3 million. You were very outspoken about making sure that you retained as much as of your budget as possible. How has the $200,000 shortfall affected you, if it has at all, and are you satisfied with your budget as it is now?
Another great question, a lot in that one. I'll start by saying, no, I'm not satisfied. When we had the budget, I went to the county commissioners both way ahead of time and as we went through and said, look, as a prosecutor who walked in the door in 2000, we had 102 attorneys. We're now about 95. The issues didn't get simpler in the last 25 years, and the city didn't get smaller. We need more prosecutors. We've done studies that show that we should be somewhere in the 113 to 130-ish area. That's where we should be. I asked and I went with very specific proposals attached to very specific approaches around strategic prosecution, using money efficiently. And I put forward all of that, and that was all given the big thumbs down. And when the budget came out, the way that Multnomah County works and the way that my office works is this. We are funded through the county, and the county essentially is how they develop their budget. I know this is a very well-educated crowd about this, but I'll just rehash it real quickly, is the chair puts out the budget, and that ends up being about 95% of what the budget's going to be. The other commissioners come along, and they certainly will, kind of what I call tinker around the edges, but that's going to be about 95% of the budget. So the chair's budget actually had us cut much deeper than that. It was around 5%, and it was going to hurt. It was going to get rid of the auto theft task force, which has been highly successful. It was going to get rid of the organized retail theft, which our businesses have been hammered hard on this area, and a number of other areas were going to get cut. So I was loud and I fought, because I believe not only we shouldn't be getting cut, we need to be increasing. You already heard the 137 number on the other side of the aisle. So what did happen is, through a lot of discussions and work and kind of really directed efforts, and quite frankly, the dedicated help of Commissioner Julia Brim-Edwards, Vincent Jones-Dixon, we were able to get most of that added back in. In fact, we had it all added back in, and at the last minute, Commissioner Singleton out of the North District decided she was going to cut my budget by 250-ish, but in that area, to give money to the public defenders, and this is the part that burns the most. Do you know how many additional criminal cases they picked up with that $250,000? Anyone hazard a guess? $250,000. Zero. They picked up absolutely zero additional cases. They used it to have social workers and to do landlord-tenant stuff, all wonderful things, but it's like they're a public defense firm, and their house is on fire. They have a crisis over here. Are we giving them a fire extinguisher to put out the fire? Nope. We're saying, here's some money to go build a yoga studio in the back. And quite frankly, that's offensive. And it hurt, not only because it didn't actually address the crisis, it was like, okay, Commissioner Singleton doesn't feel that my deputy DA, who works the position that she suggested the money should come from, was out of the North District, to have a DA that works out in the community on very neighborhood problems and helps deal with issues in St. John's and Park Rose and Dawson Park. She said, no, we don't want that. So I removed that, and guess who I hear from all the time now? I hear from Dawson Park, St. John's, and Park Rose of like, hey, there's drug dealing going on. Hey, there's theft. I mean, if we read about Park Rose, they lost Fred Meyer out there in Gateway. They're about ready to lose grocery outlet. I mean, you want to talk about creating a food desert. I mean, they are on the brink out there. And I walk in the neighborhoods out in Park Rose, and the business owners are like, we need help. And I'm like, I agree. And they say it's public safety. If you talk, if anyone cares to go talk to the owner of the grocery outlet, he will tell you repeated stories about the need for more public safety, more officers, more prosecutions, more help. And so that cut, when we talk about our priorities and where we want to see our money go, when you see those cuts, they hurt. They have real consequences. And I can tell you that was a DA that was out there working closely with these groups and had to be pulled back from that.
It is time for questions from City Club members. Line up at the microphone here, which Sam Metz has. And
Okay.
yeah, please respect the time of others. Please keep your questions at 30 seconds or less. This is for City Club members only. And begin with your name, ask your question, 30 seconds or less.
Win Wakala, City Club member. Can you give us insight into prosecuting pimps by talking about a case? And also I wondered if there was any way to help homeless girls on the streets because they're very vulnerable to being sex trafficked.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So probably in the top 5% of most challenging cases that my office deals with, but really some of the most absolute important work is in dealing with human trafficking. These are young individuals that are either violently convinced or tricked into getting into this lifestyle, and they are pimped out. And it is brutal to see firsthand. They are trafficked all up and down the West Coast, which makes a challenge is just finding them. And then, because a trial can be, 6 months, a year later. So that being able to find the witnesses and the victims, that's very difficult. They also, the process of when what they call turning someone out or, pimping them out is what's commonly referred to. It is a very, it creates multiple levels of trauma for that young child often. And there's violence that is involved. And so being able to stabilize them and get them into a safe place is a ton of work. I'll tell you, we're very fortunate in this particular county. My senior deputy DA, J.R. Ujifusa, who handles this, is truly a national expert. He goes around the country to explain because he's so good at how he does this work. It's not a measurement of, hey, he does a great job and gets convictions. It is, hey, he does a great job in helping victims out of this horrific life and getting them to a safe place. He works with community organizations, he works with law enforcement. He does the work that is really just immensely, laborious and difficult and emotional and traumatic, and does that. And it's happening in our community. And it's something that I think we don't necessarily like to talk about, but it is happening each day, and we are out there working so hard to change that.
Mac Pritchard, City Club member. You talked about the public defender problem, and you, in describing it, you said the complaint was there wasn't enough money. They got more money. The complaint was their ineffective leadership. There was a change in management. And you cited Clackamas County, which is, according to your analysis, doing well. If you were in charge and you got to press all the magic buttons, what changes would you want to see in Multnomah County with public defenders? How much would it cost? And who's in charge of making those decisions? And exactly what would they have to do?
A great question, Mr. Pritchard. Thank you. So a couple of things, and I spent far too much time thinking about this. I would rather actually focus on my side of the house. But really it comes down to, I do have, first, a lot of confidence in the current director of what we call OPDC. I'm going to give you that acronym. It's Oregon Public Defense Commission. So that's the body or board that sits over, all of the public defenders for the state of Oregon. That's Ken Sandrigan. He is working hard on this issue. What I would do if I could wave my magic wand is I would get rid of the thing that they put in that contract in place, which is called the MAC. That's the maximum allowable caseload. That is, it is fraught with loopholes, and it's like a shell game where caseloads are manipulated in a manner that leads to essentially we are not covering the need. So this community and the state of Oregon, we put out money and say, hey, we believe everyone who is charged with a crime, they have a right to an attorney. And we're giving out all this money to it, but it's that middle part, that contract that is that is causing the problem. I think it's gonna take a change of leadership in both local and state, where people that are more dedicated to the idea of we need to come together to serve community public safety. Yeah, we're going to do it from our own angle, right? They're going to vigorously represent their clients. I want them to do that. I just want them to actually take on those cases. So it's going to take a change in that, away from an ideology of, hey, they have this particular ideology that they put in place, and to one that's more of, hey, we want collaboration, we want to change. I'll tell you, initially they said, well, it's the district attorney's fault. And they listed out 5 different reasons, which I disagreed with. But I dug in and said, okay, fine, we'll make changes, we'll improve. We changed processes to reduce, what we call time to disposition, how long it takes a case to get done. We changed our misdemeanor program to reduce the number of cases that get dismissed. We looked at, was our discovery a problem? We carefully went through that to make sure that we are giving discovery on like day 1. So it is, we have dug in from our side of the house. I'm asking them to dig in the same.
Hi, Bobby Regan. We, as City Club, recently co-sponsored an event with immigrant rights groups who were trying to help us understand how to be helpful to our friends and neighbors who are getting arrested by ICE. And they had suggested that we go to trainings on Know Your Rights. They suggested we go to trainings on how to be an appropriate supporter if you see ICE trying to arrest somebody. So I wanted your opinion. If we are dropping a child off at preschool or at school, or if we're going to a neighborhood coffee shop and we see ICE aggressively looking to take someone into custody, what would your advice be in terms of how we can best support our friends and neighbors in probably the most traumatic incident of their life?
It's a wonderful question, and I really want to start with saying, and recognizing and just, how impactful and traumatic it is for our community. It obviously hurts those individuals that are, being hunted and, this draconian way in which they're being taken in. That hurts them, but it hurts everyone else around who A, has to witness it, and B, has to live in the fear. I'll tell you, the employees in my office, not only do we train and talk about this, they come to me and, I have individuals that, that maybe they were born in a different country and they say, I'm afraid. And what should I do? And I tell them, carry your ID. This is my card. You call me in the middle of the night if anything happens to you. And so it can't be understated how impactful this is. Beyond just then my everyday work of, hey, I would love to have witnesses and victims not feel too afraid to come to court. What I would say to individuals is, though, there is a line that you have to be mindful of and cautious with, which is, if you are interfering with the federal agents, I have seen where they will take people into custody that do that. So just be mindful of that. Should you film? Should you document? Should you record? Absolutely, of course. This is a moment in history that we cannot turn away from, and we should not. So, so know that, but know also that in these times where certainly, I get emotional over, you can't allow that to get you into a bad place as well. And I can never advise someone to do that. It's just not the place I'm going to be. So document, record, certainly, people should know their rights. I've seen organizations giving out cards about the rights, who to contact, things of that nature. Those are all things that are important. I know that there are organizations out there that talk about, that are basically like, I know this term is very charged, but I'm going to call them neighborhood watch type groups. There's a whole host of those that are doing that to support their neighbors. So things of that nature.
We'll make this the last question.
Ted Kay, City Club member. Inside baseball question. Most of us have an idea of what happens in the DA's office by watching television and Law and Order. Would you tell us how the real world differs from what the television version is?
It's another fantastic question. Law and Order was one of my absolute favorites, and certainly I've had the, I would say, honor and privilege of working in court, giving closing arguments and that's all very, it's exciting, fun, interesting. Serving on jury, if you get your jury summons, go. It is a huge service to the community. I find that jurors do that. If you get a grand jury subpoena, I'll tell you it's a huge commitment, but it is a wonderful one. I talk to every grand juror that serves in our community, and almost to an absolute person, they walk away saying, I only wish I could serve again and again and again. But here's how it differs. 90% of our work is on how do we work out and resolve a case that's as beneficial to parties as it can be. And that's a lot of hard work about pulling through and saying, what is the crisis that brought that person before the criminal justice system? What are the circumstances surrounding that? We're looking at the aggravating, mitigating factors. We're looking at mental health evaluations. A massive portion of what I deal with are people suffering with various mental health issues. And then another huge portion is, substance use disorder issues. And so we're looking and carefully picking through, and because I am a believer, and I will always put this forward to say, if we're doing our job the best way possible, we are doing it in a manner that gets people out of the criminal justice system. We're putting them in a place to succeed. So in other words, can we get them into a drug treatment? Can we get them into mental health, into a stable place? Because, let me tell you, the easiest thing to do, and no one likes it when I say this, but the easiest thing for me to do is send someone to prison. It's a number, it's a chart. We literally have a chart, and you can look on the grid and be like, okay, here's where you're on the grid. That's your number, off you go. It's the least satisfying, worst part of the job. What 80-90% of what we're trying to do is find ways to get people out of the criminal justice system, healthy, long-term benefit of the community, while also holding people accountable, getting justice for victims, making sure that our community is as safe as possible. That's what we're working for.
I was going to ask for a round of applause for DA Vasquez, but I see you jumped right into it. Great way to end this discussion with the Law and Order reference, because I see someone in the audience and their favorite show is Law and Order SVU, or as I call it, Law and Order SUV, which if you say that in your remote, it will take you to Law and Order SVU. So thank you very much for being out here. I appreciate everybody coming out tonight. And again, another round of applause for DA Vasquez.
Thank you, Ken. And thank you, Ken and Nathan, for helping us understand what we now understand is a very complex system that you deal with every day, but also your passion in serving justice. We want to thank our sponsors again, AARP Oregon, Chevron, Fight Against Sex Trafficking, and the Don Sterling Fund at the Oregon Community Foundation for their support. And if you'd like to know more about City Club and its mission, stop by the checkout table, and you can use the QR code or talk to one of our folks out there and learn more and hopefully become a member. We want to remind you of our events coming up. On noon December 5th, the State Treasurer Elizabeth Steiner will be in an interview with former State Treasurer Randall Edwards. And on December 12th, the end of our four-part series with Earl Blumenauer, Aaron Graham, Nolan Leinhart, and Dearden Kalaman, extending our program on the downtown revitalization. Thanks again for coming and spending your night with us. We know that your time is hard to find, and for spending with us, we feel very, very blessed, both of you. Thank you.